Texas basketball team and Texas football teams have in common in their last scheduled matchup against Texas Tech? Both teams won by double digits.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we're discussing Texas beating Texas Tech last night in Lubbock, a huge road win for the Texas basketball team as they're fighting for their NCAA tournament lives. Last night went a long way in terms of securing a berth in the NCAA tournament. And in the second segment, BetOnline released their way too early SEC championship odds. I guess they're not way too early because you have to bet on them, before the season or before the game at some point, right? And where they have Texas in relation to the other SEC schools is very interesting. So we discussed that in the second segment. And then the Texas baseball team got a big win over St. John's last night. Big for multiple reasons. One, they won 15-4, right? So that's a really big win in baseball. Also, going into the game, a little bit of Texas trivia for you. The series was tied 2-2 all time, right? So Texas is now up in the all-time series against the St. John's baseball program, 3-2. And that's important, I guess. All right, all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Huge win over the Texas Tech basketball team last night, a quad one victory for the Texas Longhorns basketball team over Texas Tech on the road. Even though Texas Tech isn't ranked, they were favored by 3.5 points. Their starting center wasn't playing. So really, if he was playing, they probably would be favored by 4.5. Not sure how much he moves the needle in terms of Vegas. But it was a really good win, right? Texas Tech has been playing better basketball than us recently. They beat us in the Moody Center. So, it was really good to get that win on the road. And I think that win last night, went a long way in terms of securing a tournament berth for the Texas Longhorns. They still have work to do, but, that was a huge hurdle to get over, beating Texas Tech last night. And it was the last scheduled matchup ever between these teams. There's still a chance we could play them in the Big 12 tournament, but that game would be in Kansas City. And there's still a chance we could play them in the NCAA tournament, but that game would not be in Lubbock or Austin. But in terms of conference play, in terms of playing them at home or on the road, all of those matchups are done for the foreseeable future. And Texas now has scoreboard for the foreseeable future, beating Texas Tech by double digits on the road in their last scheduled matchup ever. And that game had a lot of juice to it. And I know I'm in the minority when I say this. I may piss off some Texas fans, or some Texas fans may turn this off, but to me, it's a rivalry, right? Texas and Texas Tech are rivals, right? And I just don't understand what Texas fans get from saying Texas Tech is not a rivalry, right? And I know Texas Tech fans embrace the rivalry, and they'll say Texas is their biggest rival, and they show up to every sporting event against Texas as if we are their biggest rival. But most Texas fans would say Texas A&M and Oklahoma are our only rivals, and Texas Tech is just not on our level. And I think Texas A&M and Oklahoma are bigger rivals than Texas Tech. I think athletically, over the history of the programs in different athletic sports, right, Texas Tech has not been on the level of the University of Texas, but I still think it's a rival, right? I think they meet all the criteria for a rival. And I think that, it doesn't really matter now because we're going to the SEC, but I just wish that Texas fans would have embraced the rivalry a little bit more while we were entrenched in it. When I look at what makes a rival, I think Texas Tech fits all of the criteria, right? Passion, proximity, and history. These teams hate each other, right? Whether it's baseball, basketball, football, whatever sport, these teams hate each other. You can tell these games mean a little bit more to the coaching staffs and the players, right? So the players and the coaching staffs, they treat it as if it's a rivalry. To the fans, right? You get up for these games just a little bit more. I was at the Texas Tech game where we beat them by 50 points, right? That game meant a little bit more to everybody in the building, right? And there was build up all season from the Brett Yormark comments, right? You remember Chris Beard's first game at Texas Tech and how crazy that environment was. You remember where you were 16 years ago when Michael Crabtree made that catch against the University of Texas, right? Like, we all remember where we were, and that game kept us out of the national championship game. So obviously over time, Texas has been the more successful athletic program, but there's so much passion in these sporting events between Texas and Texas Tech, the fans and the players alike, because it's a rivalry. That game meant more to you yesterday because it was against Texas Tech. If we were playing Baylor, TCU, BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, you wouldn't have cared about that game or wouldn't have moved the needle for you. But because we were playing Texas Tech and because we beat Texas Tech, you felt really good about that win yesterday, or at least I hope you did, right? There's passion in those matchups. You think Brock Cunningham hip checked somebody out of bounds because he was bored, right? Or because he was making a basketball play? He did that because he was riled up because he was playing Texas Tech possibly for the last time in his career. The players and coaching staffs, they treat it as a rivalry. So who are we as fans to say that it's not a rivalry when we're not the ones with the jerseys on? Proximity. I'm not saying that every school in the state of Texas is a rival to the University of Texas. I don't consider Baylor, TCU, SMU, the University of Houston rivals, right? Because there's not real passion when we play those schools. There's not real hatred for each other when we play those schools. But the proximity, them being in state, and the passion combined, to me, makes Texas Tech a rival. And then the history, right? The football teams have played since 1928. To me, if you have not been around since 1928, and I would assume that nobody listening to this is 96 years old, then you cannot tell me that Texas and Texas Tech are not rivals because you have not been around since the inception of the rivalry or the history of the two teams playing each other, right? Like, I was born in 1993. I am 30 years old. How can I say something is not a rivalry when it was happening for almost 70 years before I was born? That does not make sense. When you look at it, the basketball, the three major sports, Texas Tech has been better recently and has reached higher heights, right? Texas has never played for a national championship in basketball. Texas Tech has, right? Comparable programs. In baseball, since 2000, Texas is 42-29 against Texas Tech. That's a 60% winning percentage. Obviously, Texas has been better. Obviously, Texas has won a national championship in that period, but they're not too far off, right? Comparable programs, with Texas being better 60-40. And then in football, Texas is 54-18 all time against Texas Tech, but Tech has never had a 5-star in the history of their program into this year, right? Micah Hudson is the first 5-star in the history of the Texas Tech football program, and he has yet to take a snap. The Texas football team has never played Texas Tech with a 5-star on the field on the Texas Tech side, right? And so, yeah, of course, like, we're going to be better all time, and that's reflected in the 54-18 record against Texas Tech. But that doesn't mean that every game, the players, the coaches, and the fans don't get up for that game and get passionate for that game because it's a rivalry. So I know I got on my soapbox. I know I talked about that for a long time, and it kind of doesn't matter now, but I just wish that Texas fans would embrace the rivalry because the players feel different when they play Texas Tech. The coaches feel different when they coach against Texas Tech, and the fans feel different when we play against Texas Tech. But somehow Texas Tech is not a rival. Doesn't add up to me. Now I want to talk about the Brock Cunningham play last night. It was not a basketball play. If you're a Texas fan and you're saying that was a basketball play, you're a little bit too biased for me, right? Take those orange colored glasses off. It definitely was not a basketball play, but it was also not a dirty play, right? Kicking somebody is a dirty play. Hitting somebody in the nuts is a dirty play. Knocking somebody out of the air down onto the ground when they're hanging on the rim or going up for a layup or a dunk is a dirty play. Hip checking somebody out of bounds when you were about to go for a loose ball and probably loose ball foul them anyway is not a dirty play. He was sending a message. He was called for a flagrant 2 and ejected, which was the proper punishment in a game he was passionate about. I got on Twitter and saw a bunch of Texas Tech fans trying to make what Brock Cunningham did representative of the University of Texas and the basketball program. Like, bro, it's a hard foul. Like, literally, that's what it was. It was a hard foul. He got a flagrant 2. He got ejected. The refs made the right call. It's over with. How is Brock Cunningham knocking somebody out of bounds representative of the University of Texas? The only reason you think it's representative of the University of Texas is because you know that what Texas Tech fans did in that game and what they do in every sporting event against the University of Texas is accurately representative of the Texas Tech fan base. And last night was an opportunity for you to deflect some of that. And I get it. But Texas won by double digits, and Brock Cunningham hip checked your player out of bounds on the way to that double-digit victory. This was a huge win for Texas last night. Texas beating Texas Tech 81-69. And I love to see this team get back to playing Texas Longhorns basketball. And I love to see this team getting back to playing like a Rodney Terry coach team, right? And it was interesting to me because every time Texas loses, I get on social media and Rodney Terry's damn near trending, right? And all I see is quotes and tweets about Rodney Terry and how he's not the coach for the job, and how Texas had to make the decision to make him the coach because of PR, and how we should have just suspended Chris Beard for a year because he was building something special. And so I'm like, damn, every time we lose, there's a ton of conversation about Rodney Terry. So we won last night. So I got on Twitter. I'm like, let me see what people are saying about Rodney Terry. Nothing on my timeline. So I searched Rodney Terry, right? No Texas fans giving him credit for a hard-fought win. And I was like, why are we discussing his job security every time he loses, but when he wins, there's crickets and nobody wants to give him credit on social media? The same social media they use to say that he's not the right coach for the job. That's interesting to me. I wouldn't think the Texas fan base would be one-sided like that and only talk about one of our own and only talk about our coach when he loses and don't say anything about him when he wins. But, I don't know. Maybe it was just the algorithm last night. Maybe I couldn't see what I was looking for on Twitter. What I loved about this matchup last night against Texas Tech and what I loved about what we saw from the Texas Longhorns basketball team is this team has been notorious for getting off to slow starts, especially on the road, right? And in this game, they never trailed. They built a double-digit lead 7 minutes into the game, and they held a double-digit lead the last 24 minutes of the game, spanning from the first half to the second half. They out-rebounded Texas Tech by 14, which shows effort and grit, especially on the road. In the last two losses to U of H, they got out-rebounded by double digits in both of those games. And you remember how that looked on the court while you were watching the game. They did that to Texas Tech last night, out-rebounded them by 14. It looked dominant, right? Clearing the entire side of the floor for Dessou to ISO was great offense, and he dominated, especially in the first half. Made some really good plays and buckets off the pick and roll in the second half. Max Aceman still didn't shoot to his standard, 5 for 15. That's 33% from the floor. I think he was 4 for 12 from three, which is 33% from the three-point line as well. But the 4 threes were huge, and his 2-point bucket was a tough jumper at the end of the shot clock. So Max Aceman was huge in this game. Your bench production, right? Kendall Weaver, Brock Cunningham, and Caden Shedrick combined for 24 points, right? In combination with what Max Aceman and Dylan Dessou are asked to do, that's huge. If they can do that every game, this is a completely different Texas basketball team. They took advantage of being in the bonus for long stretches and shot 30 free throws, right? That's huge in terms of getting a victory. And you could see the clear development this season of players like Kendall Weaver, right? Ithiel Horton, Caden Shedrick, Dylan Dessou, and Dylan Mitchell. Reminder, last year at this time, Dylan Dessou was averaging like 8 points a game. Now he's one of the most deadly scorers in college basketball. From game one of the season until now, you see development in all of those players, or at least you should see it. I don't know what you want to see at this point. This team still plays hard and competes for Rodney Terry. And what you saw on the court last night is a reflection of his leadership, right? I've seen people say when they lose or when they come out and play, sloppy and don't look like they want to be there, that's a reflection of Rodney Terry. Okay. Well, what you saw last night in a double-digit win over Texas Tech on the road is a reflection of Rodney Terry as well, and his leadership and how the players with the Texas on their jersey feel about their head coach and the staff and Rodney Terry and his staff. And with 2 of your 3 remaining games at home against Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, Texas greatly improved their tournament chances last night, once again with a quad 1 victory on the road against Texas Tech. So huge victory for the Texas basketball team last night, huge victory for Rodney Terry and staff to help secure a spot in the NCAA tournament. And it's great for this program to get scoreboard over a rival, Texas Tech, moving forward with no scheduled matchups in the foreseeable future. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into BetOnline's SEC championship odds. They have Texas in a very interesting spot in relation to all the other SEC schools. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the National Basketball Association. All right, switched it up a little bit. Went with the basketball topic before football. On a podcast like this, that's a no-no. But, passionate victory last night, over Texas Tech. So I thought that took precedent over BetOnline's SEC Conference Championship odds. But I did think they were interesting. BetOnline released their odds for teams to make the SEC championship. And, really quickly before I get into Texas's odds and what I think about them, I'll go through each team's and the SEC's odds, right? And if you're not a bettor or you don't understand how gambling works, right, I'm going to do my best not to endorse gambling now or get you on the path to start gambling, right? But I'll try to explain how this works, right? So these odds are the money that you would make if you placed a $100 bet on this team, right? So, for instance, Georgia has the best odds to make the SEC championship. Their odds are plus 200. That means if you bet $100 on Georgia to make the SEC championship and they make the SEC championship, then you win $200. All right, here we go. Georgia plus 200, Texas plus 250. The next school is Ole Miss at plus 650. Tennessee plus 900, Alabama plus 900, LSU plus 1,000, Missouri plus 1,100, Texas A&M plus 2,200, Oklahoma plus 5,000, Auburn plus 5,000, Kentucky plus 8,000, South Carolina plus 9,000, Florida plus 10,000, Arkansas 12,500, Mississippi State 20,000, Vanderbilt the lowest odds at 25,000. A $100 bet on Vanderbilt to make the SEC championship would win you $25,000. I hope I'm not giving you any ideas because you know for a fact that Vanderbilt will not make the SEC championship, right? So yes, $25,000 is a lot of money, but so is the $100 you would lose, right? It's also crazy to me that Texas A&M has plus 2,200 odds and Oklahoma has plus 5,000. Like I know Oklahoma lost a lot going into the SEC and they have a lot of question marks, but why does Texas A&M have twice better odds than Oklahoma does, coming off a 5-7 season with a new head coach? I don't understand that at all, but I guess we'll see, right? Seems like the outside world is really high on Texas A&M, and maybe it's my Texas bias because I think Texas A&M is going to be borderline trash next season. I don't know, but anyway, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I think it's very interesting that Georgia and Texas have significantly better odds than the rest of the conference. I mean, Georgia, it makes sense. They won 2 of the last 3 national championships. They were in the SEC championship game last year. It makes a ton of sense, right? Texas was in the playoffs last year. One of the most talented teams in the country, certainly a legitimate national championship contender. It makes sense that Texas would be high on this list. But the consensus I've seen is that most people have talked about Ole Miss as being one of the best teams in college football this year. Most people have talked about Ole Miss being a legitimate national championship contender this year. And for them to have plus 650 odds compared to Texas having plus 250 odds was interesting to me. Now, obviously, I think Georgia and Texas will end up in the SEC championship game at the end of the year. I think that Bet Online got it right. But I just don't think that Texas should have twice the better odds than Ole Miss should have when you look at what Ole Miss did to their roster and what they have the potential to do this season, right? It also is Texas's first year in the SEC. There's going to have to be some level of adjustment there. So I was a little surprised to see Bet Online favoring Texas so high over Ole Miss, but hey, I love it, right? I'm a Texas fan, and I think they'll be there in Atlanta at the end of the season. So when you look at it, Texas SEC schedule, obviously the games against Colorado State, ULM, UTSA, and Michigan have nothing to do with Texas making the SEC championship at the end of the season. SEC schedule, they have Mississippi State at home. I believe that's a win. I don't think that's a challenging game for the Longhorns. Oklahoma, anything can happen in Red River, but I'm hoping that the fact that they lost that game last year fuels the fire and they go in and win that game. Also, Steve Sarkisian started off with a loss to Oklahoma, so it's only right in that type of rivalry that he gets a win and makes it 2-2 in his first 4 years against Oklahoma. At home against Georgia, I think that game can go either way. But when I pick the full 12 games on the schedule, I picked Georgia to win that game. At Vanderbilt, that should be a win for Texas. Kentucky at home, that should be a win for Texas. Florida at home, that should be a win for Texas. At Arkansas and at Texas A&M, obviously Texas will be the more talented team, but these are historical rivalries, right? These are historical rivalries where anything can happen in those type of environments. And and in Kyle Field, there's going to be 105,000 strong, right? In Arkansas, we saw how, tough that matchup can be on the road in 2021, even though this Texas football team is a lot better now. So I would say that there's 4 losable SEC games on their schedule. Will they lose all 4 of those games? Of course not, right? Is there a chance they can win all 4 of those games? Of course, right? But I think Oklahoma, Georgia, at Arkansas, and at Texas A&M are games that this Texas football team could, keyword, could lose. Now, when we look at Ole Miss's SEC schedule, Kentucky at home, I think they beat them. At South Carolina, I think they beat them. At LSU is a game that's certainly questionable. I think I picked LSU to win that game. That's definitely a game that LSU could win or Ole Miss could lose, right? Oklahoma at home, I think Ole Miss will win that game, but that's certainly a game that Ole Miss could lose, right? At Arkansas, I don't think that game means as much to Arkansas fans as the Texas game would. So I don't think Ole Miss would lose that game, but I don't want to say Texas could lose it and Ole Miss couldn't. So, I'll throw at Arkansas in there. Georgia, obviously Georgia, wherever, even in Oxford, Mississippi is a game that Ole Miss could lose. At Florida and against Mississippi State at home, obviously the Egg Bowl is a big rivalry, so anything could happen, but I think Ole Miss wins both of those matchups. So realistically, I think there's 3 games on the schedule that Ole Miss could lose in SEC play against LSU, against Oklahoma, and against Georgia, but I could see, maybe anything happening in that Arkansas and Mississippi State game. So I think both teams in Ole Miss and Texas are legitimate national championship contenders, and I think both teams have 3 to 4 losable SEC games on their schedule. So I appreciate, Texas being 2+250 in the odds to make the SEC championship. I appreciate, Bet Online thinking that Texas is a clear tier above the Ole Miss football team at this point, right? But I'm just not sure that's the case. And we won't know until we see it on the field in the 2024 season. But Bet Online certainly thinks that Georgia and Texas are the clear favorites to make the SEC championship game, and Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, LSU, et cetera, are a clear tier below the two top teams in the conference. Once again, the Georgia Bulldogs and the Texas Longhorns. And how electric would it be if we got to see that matchup twice next year, once in DKR and once in Atlanta, Georgia, to win the conference? A quick word from our sponsors, and we get out of here talking about the baseball team getting a huge win against St. John's last night in preparation to come down to Houston and play at Minute Maid in the Astros Foundation Classic this weekend. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With zone deals, you pick the section and Gametime picks the seats for big-time savings, and the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Right now, all Gametime users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. Terms apply. Just download the Gametime app and use code Vegas100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, so Texas started off the season, the baseball team, with an 8-game homestand. We now know the results of that 8-game homestand. They were 7-1 in those 8 games, beating St. John's 15-4 last night, and they now are 3-2 all time against St. John's. The only thing I can think of when I think of St. John's is over the weekend, I think it was on Saturday, I watched Creighton and St. John's playing basketball, and they were in Madison Square Garden, and Rick Pitino had on an all-white suit, and he was just so clean. So now anytime I think of St. John's, I'll forever think of Rick Pitino in that all-white suit, right? Coaching against Creighton and getting an upset victory, right? But in baseball, they don't have the Rick Pitino matchup because now Texas is 3-2 all time against St. John's. When you look at the pitching, I love to start with the pitching. Max Grubb started the game, allowing 3 hits, 2 walks, and 3 runs while recording 7 outs. So he only pitched into the 3rd inning, but thankfully the bullpen came in strong and pitched really well in relief, damn near the whole game, right? 6 different pitchers came in from the 3rd inning to the 9th inning, allowing 5 hits, 2 walks, and just 1 run, including 3 no-hit innings from the 7th to the 9th inning. St. John's did not record a hit and 2 perfect innings to end the game. In the 8th and 9th innings, St. John's did not record a hit or a walk. Jalen Flores outscored the entire St. John's team as he drove in 6 runs with a grand slam and a 2-run homer. St. John's only scored 4 runs themselves. Will Gasparino went 3 for 3 with a double and 4 runs batted in. Jared Thomas and Peyton Powell combined to go 3 for 7 at the plate and drove in 4 runs as well. Maybe the best 1 and 2 hitting combination in college baseball right now. So Texas will play LSU on Friday, Texas State on Saturday, and Vanderbilt on Sunday, all this weekend at Minute Maid Park in Houston, where the Astros play and where the Rangers celebrated their ALCS victory in 2023. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace. Shout out Rodney Terry.